Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Addy, and I'm a Business Development Manager at Data Brackets, and I will be your host for today's event. I'm joined by our Director, Srini Kolathur, and our guest, Mr. Greg Manson from Tigo Data. Data Brackets has been at the forefront of supporting businesses to comply with HIPAA, SOC 2, ISO 27001, CMMC, and other compliance certifications for over a decade. As an organization, we are a candidate to become a C3PAO or a CMMC third-party assessment organization. Our staff members are also being trained to work as CMMC certified professionals and certified CMMC assessors. We are delighted to bring you this webinar with our partner, Tigo Data, and their VP of Security, Audit and Compliance, Mr. Greg Manson. Tigo Data is a CMMC registered practitioner organization, and Mr. Greg Manson is a CMMC registered practitioner. In today's webinar, we aim to empower suppliers who plan to work with the Department of Defense by helping them understand how to comply with CMMC 2.0 controls and protect CUI. We will explain the numerous acronyms you will come across on your CMMC journey, the timeline to comply with CMMC version 2 controls, the implementation roadmap, pitfalls during implementation, the stages of certification, and how you can plan to succeed on your CMMC certification journey. With this new cybersecurity standard becoming applicable in a matter of months, we will explain why you need to begin your certification journey immediately to save time and money and get an advantage while bidding for contracts by getting certified in time. During this webinar, there are a couple of basic housekeeping rules to keep in mind. The webinar today will be approximately 45 minutes long, including a Q&A session at the end. However, if we exceed this limit, you can log off and view the recording that will be shared with all participants. Please note, all lines will be muted during the presentation. I encourage you to submit your questions as they come up. You can simply type in your question in the chat panel on the right side of your screen. And for those of you who have already submitted them, thank you. We have included them in the prepared presentation. This presentation deck is available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel for you to download. If you have any questions which come up after the webinar, you can email us or connect with an expert through our website. You can also stay connected with us through social media. I'd like to begin with our disclaimer. This webinar has been provided for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended and should not be construed to constitute legal advice. Please consult your attorneys in connection with any fact-specific situation under federal law and the applicable state or local laws that may impose additional obligations on you and your company. I have the privilege of introducing our director, Srini Kolathur. Srini is a results-driven security and compliance professional with over 20 years of experience in leading and managing global IT security, compliance, support, and risk assessment in Fortune 100 companies. Some of his key areas of focus are HIPAA, PCI, Sarbanes-Oxley, ISO 27000 series, NIST cybersecurity framework, and CMMC, among others. He is active in several community groups, including Rotary International and TIE. I could go on and on about Srini's experience and achievements, but will not do justice. Therefore, I hand it over to Srini, who can perhaps best speak about his experiences, the services offered at Data Brackets, and introduce our partner, Tigo Data, and Mr. Greg. Over to you, Srini.
Thank you, Aditi, and hello, everybody. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understand I'm not an AI bot talking or this slide deck. So good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining and also listening in for the recorded version. As Aditi mentioned, my name is Srini Kolathur, and I'm part of Data Brackets. And so Aditi, if you could move to the next slide, please. Just a quick introduction about data brackets. Actually, we are primarily into assessment. So we do all sort of assessments starting from HIPAA all the way to CMMC. And as Aditi mentioned, we are a candidate for C3PAO, and we will be the organization you will be reaching out to get your CMMC level 2 certification. If you could go back to the earlier slide for a quick second, please. So the way we operate is like we have the DIY platform where you could go in and do your own assessment if you have your in-house expertise and whatnot, right? And if you don't have expertise or if you don't understand the topics and things, like, of course, you can hire our consulting engineers to come in and do our professional services. And the last part is the managed security, where we focus mostly on the SIM and the SOC monitoring of your environment and things. Next slide, please. So these are like some of the assessments that we could do for you, like starting from HIPAA all the way to PCA, DSS, and VAPT, vulnerability and pen testing. And the most recent service that we introduced is, of course, the CMMC, whether it is the certification part or partnering with some of our partners like Tigo Data to get the readiness. We definitely would be able to help you out, and we will be one of your resources. Next slide, please. And so, of course, like we need to have some certification, accreditations, and credentials to all these things. Most of our consultants who operate in the space, like they all have some of the certifications that are listed here. And also, as an organization, we are certified for ISO 17020. That is like the assessment conformity for all the assessment shops. So that's what we have, and that's what is also required as part of the CMMC C3PAO. So that is something we have, and also we do ISO 27001 certification. So we are certified for ISO 17021 certificate. That is what allows us to do the 27001 certification. So we got accredited by IAS for that one. So if you could move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So I am really very excited to announce, Greg Manson to be, presenting today's topic. And I've been working with Greg for the past, like probably almost 8-10 years or so. Greg is very, very passionate about this topic. Especially, whenever we have some kind of consulting or advisory related questions, Greg is the first person that I reach out to, and he's very knowledgeable in the space, and very, very excited to have Greg here share his experience on the CMMC front. So of course, like you could look at Greg's accomplishments on this slide, and without further ado, Greg, over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Srini, and hi, everybody. It's a privilege to be here, and it's a great opportunity for the attendees and listeners, because you're going to get a one-stop shop view on CMMC compliance and up to date with all of the current news and changes that have happened in version 2. At Tego, as Srini has said, we run an advisory team. We are focused primarily on the internal side and implementation of your compliance initiatives. And our best example today is operating as a registered practitioner organization. The structure of today's presentation is to talk about the implementation, what you need to do before you engage the third-party assessor and proceed through the assessment process. But the great part of this presentation is at the end, we're going to talk about the assessment process. So you get the coming and going for all of the part of your CMMC travels road to certification. So I'm excited to get in. I'm going to go ahead and drop my video so we can all have a full screen. When we get started, as you probably know, there are a lot of acronyms. And it's pretty much an alphabet soup. So I'm going to run through some of the acronyms so you know what we're talking about when we go in. Obviously, CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. The CAP is the CMMC the authorization process. The RP is the Registered Practitioner, and an RPA is a new certification in the ecosystem that is an advanced registered practitioner. That advanced level means that we have the skills to assist you in a level 2 assessment from start to finish. So we can go in as your advisory team and get the pre-assessment done, get you under POAMs, and get you moving into the next step for the actual certification. RPO is the organization. I have with me another RPA. He's in the RPA training right now, is Tyler Booker and myself. So there's actually two of us that are working on the advisory side. The CCP is a CMMC certified professional, and the A is assessor. The certified professional is interesting because that allows essentially provides a certification for your staff to understand all the comings and goings and nuances of CMMC. The C3PAO is the organization that's actually going to work through the official certification against CMMC. CMMC is all built around the protection of FCI, federal contract information, and CUI, controlled and classified information. The organization seeking compliance, or OSC, is going to be you, the listener, looking to get your certification. The POAM is plans of action and milestones. That is the plan to address gaps that are identified in the assessment process. The LTP is the licensed training provider, and that's interesting because we mentioned the CCP, where you potentially could train your staff to be professionals in the CMMC process. You would engage a licensed training partner to do that. Data Brackets and Tego have a business partner that can allow that service. If you're interested in that, we'll follow up with you later. You can ask them the questions. Some of the actual certification and CAP. So process terms are R&R, roles and responsibilities, LPDC, limited practice deficiency correction, and EMAS, which is the cybersecurity management platform that's going to be used in the certification process. All three of those Srini's going to talk about in his section. So let's talk about the first one. What is CMMC? So CMMC in its simplest form is a comprehensive framework to protect the DIB, or the defense industrial base, and the sensitive unclassified information that exists in that base. So the defense industrial base is you, the contractors, prime and sub in the defense supply chain. And the key point about CMMC, and I can't emphasize enough, is that it's DoD's recognition of and response to complex cyber attacks that are happening in the supply chain, in every supply chain, in every industry. This is specific to protecting the DoD supply chain, and it's very, very important, which would be the next slide. Why is CMMC important? Well, you probably anecdotally know, but we have some egregious examples. We've been doing presentations on CMMC to really let you understand how bad the environment really is and why it needs protecting. In 2018, a supplier to the Naval Warfare, Undersea Warfare Center, got breached. And through that breach, the threat actors, which were nation states, and we don't have to mention who they are, you probably already know, were able to exfiltrate 14 gigabytes of data. And this wasn't just any old data. It wasn't just PII. This was data about the signal systems, the radio room encryption that's being used, and worse, the entire naval electronic warfare library. That's the playbook that the Navy uses to launch and protect our country against electronic warfare. They got access to that information. The estimates for the impact are, it's almost irrecoverable, and they're going to be having to make substantial changes to what's in that library and some of the processes to it. But that was a big hit in 2018. And then, of course, the most popular example is the complete stealing of the F-35 design for the creation of the Chinese J-31. And that came, guess what, from a subcontractor for Lockheed Martin, who is the maker of the F-35. China was able to get enough information to pretty much duplicate all of the efforts and the technology and the investment that we did in F-35. So these are like glaring, conspicuous, visually attractive examples, but this is why CMMC is important. And if you have any doubts that CMMC is not going to be required or that it's going to continue to be kicked down the road, you're wrong. We have to protect the information. Now the DoD knows that, and they're pushing strong to finish rulemaking, and we'll go over the timelines to force certification if you want to participate. So who needs to be CMMC certified? Well, if you're attending this session, you probably already know. It's going to be anybody in the DoD supply chain, and that's anybody specifically with federal contract information or controlled and classified information. Newsflash, if you're in the supply chain, even if you're a sub, it's highly likely, it's definitely the case that you'll have federal contract information in your environment, but there's also potential for the controlled unclassified information that's going to require you to get a certain level 2 of certification. We'll get into that a little bit more. According to the DoD, the CMMC requirements are going to affect over 300,000 organizations. I've seen estimates go as high as 600,000. That means there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of companies chasing down compliance in a relatively short timeline. We know it's important. We know why the DoD is doing it, and we know they're not going to back down. It's not going away. I can't stress that enough. I hear that frequently in talking to customers, and it's not going to be kicked down the road, and the dilution that everybody's expecting isn't going to happen, because we have to have a certain level of control to protect this information so we don't have egregious breaches like we did with the F-35 and Sea Dragon. So our outline for today is going to be reviewing CMMC version 2. The version 2 was published last year, and about this time became public knowledge. And there have been some updates with version 2 that have come out. It's important for you to know that Data Bracket, Srini, Tago, Greg, Tyler, we were all at the CMMC ecosystem meeting last week in DC, networking and getting as many updates as we can to know and get an estimate to provide guidance to you for timelines and when rulemaking is going to be finished. The updates are version 2. We're going to talk about rulemaking and the estimated timeline, like I just said, and then we're going to get into the implementation piece, which is what the RPO will do to help you, and the certification process, which is what Data Brackets is going to help you with. So what is CMMC 2.0 and what are the levels? we have this handy chart which compares and contrasts version 1 to version 2. And this was fun this time last year because everybody thought that eliminating 2 levels would somehow make this easier. It really didn't change a thing. There's the optional 20 or the plus 20 processes that have been taken out, but it is still at its core an assessment against NIST Special Publication 800-171. That if you have CUI, again, controlled unclassified information in your environment as part of, if you're a manufacturer, the manufacturing process, if it's got some IP or designs or even software code, that's going to be CUI. You need to have that protected. You're going to be shooting for level 2. And level 2 is going to also involve a C3PAO. Other than that, they did drop the processes. I can tell you that as an RPO, we're still going to push for some of the processes. The one that we like the most is documentation that there's a committed budget to establish and maintain your control environment. So all the things we're looking at in 800-171, we want to see that there's actually budget so that you know that those controls will continuously be available and be operational throughout the time that you have CUI in your environment. So when will CMMC 2.0 come into effect? This is the thing that everybody's really been asking. There's been a lot of speculation, and heck, I'm pretty sure there's a book out in Las Vegas that is trying to guess when this is going to happen too. So you will see, because it hasn't been set in stone by the DoD, when it's going to be happening. What rulemaking is they've taken the CMMC requirements that you just saw, and they are deciding when and how that's going to be implemented into the supply chain. So there'll be additional instructions on when and how. It's not going to be what. What is CMMC? It is 800-171. So the guidance we got this time last year was that DoD is going to be going through rulemaking. Companies will be required to be compliant once that comes into effect. As I mentioned, Shirney, Tyler, and I were all up in DC last week at the ecosystem, and the general consensus is that rulemaking will be finished in some point in Q2 with the estimated target of May 2023. Why is that important? Because once the rulemaking is finished and the companies are required to comply, you will have 60 days until the requirements will be written into the contracts and required. What we see happening, and again, this is speculation based on good information, but speculation, it should be used to give you a rough guide that you are going to need to have your compliance in order by the start of fiscal year 24, which is October 1st, 2023. That's federal fiscal year. So the timeline we're telling people is to, right at this point, anticipate that rulemaking is going to be complete. Through July, you're going to be seeing contracts written that will be effective on October 1st, and that you need to be addressing your plans of action. Remember, the plan of action milestones is your plan to address gaps that have been identified in the pre-assessment process, and actually after the assessment if the C3PAO identifies gaps. So there we go. I'd like to show this. This is like a blast from the past. This time we've just traveled back to November of 2021, where I was pointing to the start of fiscal year 24 based on the information we had at that time. And I'd like to emphasize that because rulemaking for Part 32 of the CFR, as well as DFARS Part 48, are all going to be done sometime in Q2 of 23. And that means that this is going to get serious and real on October 1st of 2023 or fiscal year 24. That was the original timeline document, by the way, that I used to talk about how they're doing the crawl, walk, run approach, and they're not doing the crawl, walk, run approach with version 2. So a lot of people thought that that would make things easier. Actually, I think the crawl, walk, run would have been better, but it's essentially going to be a light switch now. So we are waiting for rulemaking to finish in summary. And in summary, we're waiting for rulemaking to finish. And when it does, it's going to be required. That's not a lot of time. We talked about 300,000 entities. They're going to be rushing to do this. If you have been procrastinating at all, now's the time to stop procrastinating and get to work and engage and start your implementation for CMMC if you haven't already. And what we're going to talk about next are the requirements for CMMC. What is FCI and CUI to some extent, and then get into how we can help you with the implementation. So here's that slide again. And I've already talked about it a little, so we don't have to spend too much time. But we are estimating that most of the clients in this audience are going to be shooting for level 2. Some may be level 1. Level 1, the difference is the same as it was initially. Those with only federal contract information can do level 1, and it can be an annual self-assessment. Level 2, there is an option for some organizations based on the type of CUI that they may be able to actually do a self-assessment also. What is the self-assessment? It is you reporting in a similar fashion to what you're doing right now with the SPRS reporting system, but not necessarily involving the C3PAO to get the certification. But honestly, if you're at level 2, I don't see a case, and this rulemaking will give us a little more guidance. I don't see a case to really differentiate those that are allowed to do just self-assessment. So in addition to that May timeline, I'm telling you that if you have CUI in your environment, you're going to want to engage TAGO, and you're going to want to set up the assessment with data brackets and get working on that because of those requirements. So what is FCI? It's federal contract information. It's anything about the contract. So it's not just the contract itself. A lot of people think, well, we have federal contract, we got the contract, we can keep that out of our environment. It's not that. It's everything that led into your proposal. It's the feedback that you got back as you were in the contracting process. It is any supporting document or information that was used to get the contract in addition to the contract information, including terms, timelines, and all of those things. That is more information than a lot of people initially think. That, and in an organization that has multiple contracts, they typically have a system where that's maintained. That's what we're going to be looking at protecting with that limited subset level 1 controls. CUI is information that the government creates or possesses. There's some interpretation into what CUI actually is. It's difficult to define in clarity out of context from your specific organization, but it's essentially information that the government wants to protect that's not classified. The best example for that can be, in a manufacturing context, design diagrams that may include parts that are involved in weapon systems. At some point, that may actually become U.S. MIL or military list data. And then in that case, you're going to be subject to ITAR. That's a whole nother discussion. But the idea is that CUI is going to be the information that's going into the product or service that you're providing. And we have this chart up here that kind of breaks down what you're going to be doing at ML 1 and 2, as I've already talked about. This is the old diagram. You'll see that the organization that has CUI is ML3. That's actually ML2 now, as is the prime. But this workflow is exactly the same. You'll see some organizations, for instance, commercial off-the-shelf products and software that don't have to get a CMMC cert. You'll have contractors that have all that information to get the contract. They'll have to get level 1 and then level 2 for anybody that has the CUI. And again, we're saying it is most likely that you're going to need to involve a C3PAO to get the assessment or to get the certification. So I told you that this was a fortunate opportunity for you all because you're getting the one-stop shop with regard to the implementation and the certification. So who helps you do that? Well, to start, and actually this is, I'll tell you, it's these two entities which you have today speaking to. You have Tego, we are an RPO. You have data brackets, they are C3PAO. And these are the differences. I will talk over them and tell you that the number one thing about the RPO is that we are certified and trained by Cyber AB, the organization that has been asked by the DoD to manage this process, in the assessment and the requirements and the framework and the interpretation of controls in 171, so that we're trained in that so that we can actually assess you against that. And importantly, on the RPO side, we can also offer guidance and consulting and advisory work and help you create your POAMs, for instance. Recommend specific actions that you can take to address the gaps that we've identified. Make sure that the actions you are taking address those gaps. That's an important piece. And interact with you to essentially get everything into the box, wrap the box, and get it ready for your engagement with the C3PAO, who will be going through a very rigorous process. And I want you to see, when you hear Srini talking, to know that the RPO is going to be helping you get all of your ducks in a row so that that process will be successful. We mentioned the self-attestation. We mentioned this process of engaging the RPO. Here's the thing, the self-attestation, I welcome you to do that. I could tell you that I'm skeptical of organizations that are going to do that for one reason. In our experience in dealing with other DFARS requirements, such as 2019, we have seen organizations not report their status against 171 correctly. Either there's interpretations of the controls, or like misinterpretations, or there's just a negligence in the way that they're scoring themselves. You can't afford to do that in this process. Bringing in an RPO, we are certified information systems auditors. We have 2 codes of ethics, of the CMMC and the ISACA code of ethics, that we're going to be operating under to make sure that what we're looking at is what needs to be done, and protecting you from the False Claims Act. If you're submitting information attesting to something that's not true in your environment, you're at risk for personal fines and fees, and maybe even jail time. I like to lecture about that, the False Claims Act. Remember, that came from Abraham Lincoln. It came during the Civil War, and it was specifically because he was angry that he was getting ripped off by, guess who? Defense industrial base contractors during the Civil War. So this has a legacy. It will have teeth with that False Claims Act. The best way to ensure that you don't run afoul of that is to engage the RPO. In addition to the fact that we're going to set you up nicely so that your engagement with data brackets is efficient and will yield few, if any, plans of action or milestone. So what does the journey look like? If you were to ask me what we are going to be doing, and there's like an implementation roadmap that has some bullet points that support this slide that we'll talk about in a second. But the key thing is, building your system security plan. And the SSP is a tough process, and we see a lot of organizations that have one, but they tend to be too general, or they don't necessarily identify protections for CUI in their environment. So really, even before the SSP creation is the identifying of CUI in your environment. And newsflash, if you have multiple contracts, that's not as easy as you think. Their RPO, in our experience, have tools and techniques to help you identify the CUI, and then we can make sure that your SSP is addressing the protection requirements for that CUI. You'll notice that I say that there's Project Spectrum out there, and that's going to be a link. Project Spectrum has been provided by the DoD and the Cyber AB to allow you to get a lot of self-help materials. And regardless of if you engage the RPO, and I think that you would be crazy not to, I encourage you still to go to the Project Spectrum, and the link is at the end of this presentation, to get the information that you need, which include templates and even recommendations for assessing your organization, so that you can kind of go through it self-guided to know what this process is going to be looking like. So when you engage the RPO, you're going to be more efficient in that pre-assessment process. And we may I have identified the plans of action and milestones. And that's what you see there. We'll be brought in for the readiness assessment, and we'll issue provisional programs. So the gaps that we see, we're going to, again, identify plans of action and milestone and help you navigate all of that. And one unique thing about Tego as an RPO is that we also have a full pro services team, professional services team on the systems and networking side, where we will find gaps. We can actually offer suggestions from our own team. We're not here to sell product or additional services as the RPO, but the benefit of buying those services through us is that we can actually guide them as the RPO and the advisors. We can guide the other professional services team on doing it to properly address your plan of action milestone. Once you get everything teed up and all your POAMs addressed, and we're confident in the readiness assessment, you engage the C3PAO. In this case, it's going to be data brackets, and they're going to navigate you through the assessment process, the CAP. And Srini's going to go through all of those things. But ideally, at the end of 180 days, you're going to end up coming out of this with a certification. You'll be good to go, and boom, you're in contact and ready to go for the next 3 years with regard to the contract obligations that the DoD is asking for. I enumerated that timeline in a series of bullets for you to follow. If we go to the next slide. Oop. The implementation roadmap. This is the Word version of the diagram that we laid out for you. But essentially, go to Project Spectrum, familiarize yourself with the required practices, build or update your system security plan, engage the RPO for the pre-assessment. The other thing is that we can give you a reasonable timeline. Engaging the C3PAO can get expensive. It gets really expensive if you have to pay them twice. If you fail the certification, you're going to be engaging them, and that's going to duplicate your costs. We don't want that. We are going to be able to advise and consult with you through the process so that you're in the best position possible when you engage the C3PAO. I have a bullet here about this, and this is for organizations that plan to commit IT and or QA staff to this process to manage it internally, there is an option for you to get your staff trained. I would recommend that you do that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, Tego and Data Brackets have a partner that will allow for, or that conducts licensed training. And it is, there is no exception. You need to use a licensed training provider. We can put you in touch with that so that you can train your own staff. In the C3PAO world, the CCP is the start for being allowed to do assessments and moving up to the CCA, the assessor role. Now, the LTP is going to be the authorized trainer for all of those certifications, and of course, engage in the C3PAO. And then the biggest thing is following proper change management protocols, because the environments are dynamic. So you'll come in, get this assessment as new software comes in or hardware changes, software updates. You need to make sure that you're diligent on your change management and aware of how that impacts the controls that you were certified against. And of course, the RPO can help you with that in various contexts, up to and including internal audit as a service. Okay, so I've talked about all the benefits of the RPO and how we can help and get you in the best possible position for getting certified. But what does the certification process look like? And lucky for you, we have Srini to talk about what the C3PAO is going to do in the engagement. And I'll hand it off to Srini to describe that for us.
Sure, Greg. Definitely, I'll be happy to go over that. So the good news is, 75, in my opinion, about 70 to 75% of the heavy lifting needs to be done by the RPOs and the OSCs, organizations seeking certifications, right? And then our job is essentially to come in and make sure you are meeting the requirements published by CyberAB and endorsed by DoD. So CyberAB, working with DoD, they published about 5 or 6 critical guides. One of them is CAP. You probably listened to Greg, and he referred CAP a lot during his presentation. So that is CAP stands for CMMC assessment process, right? So that's like kind of our Bible. That's what we are going to follow to make sure we follow each one of the bullet points that are listed in there. You all have access to it, and they are trying to create a very, very transparent approach to this whole certification process. And worst case scenario, if you don't agree with us in terms of our assessment, right, you could appeal the whole process. If you understand the whole the CAP process and stuff, then like you could appeal, go and appeal to DoD directly in terms of the way it works. All of the things that we are going to be doing as C3PAO, that's all going to be recorded. That's what Greg was alluding to in his acronym list, EMAS, which stands for the Enterprise, I think it stands for the Enterprise Assessment, Enterprise Assessment and Assurance System, right? Management system. So that's where like all of the information that we are collecting from you as OSC and as assessor, we are going to be collecting and then uploading it into EMAS, which is managed by the DoD group. In phase 1, at a very high level, again, it goes based on the planning and then the actual assessment, and then closing out the assessment, which is phase 3, and then pretty much wrapping up everything, right? That's how the 4 phases are created. Phase 1 technically could range from 1 to several days. Also, there is a concept of this limited practice deficiency correction, which I think as OSC, you all need to be aware of it. What CyberAB and DoD allows us to do is there are about 15 or so controls within that 800-171 that are allowed to be in this category. What it essentially means is you will have about 5 days, technically 5 days, even after our assessment. Let's say we identify a few issues. For example, your architecture diagram is not updated. and it's not reflecting properly in terms of the items that are need to be in their assets and the user base and whatnot of the sites, right? Or like it could be some of your documentation and the approvals are not in there, or like some of the sections are missing and stuff. Those kind of things is what are packaged under the limited practice deficiency correction, which you will have as OSC about 5 days to correct, and that will allow you to basically, the way they're working is like, if you go back to the earlier slide one more time, please. I'll quickly go over some of the key things that OSC need to be aware of, right? So essentially everything is started from OSC. Let's say it's an organization, right? OSC, they kind of keep it complicated, but you're the company, you're the organization seeking certification. So you kind of initiate that. You go to CMMC Marketplace, identify a C3PAO and say, hey, I want to go through the certification process. We think we are ready. We think we've done the 75% of all the work that needs to be done, the self-assessment, engaging our RPO, and making sure that, like, all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and whatnot, like have identified the boundaries of the system, the entire assets, and the interfaces and whatnots, and then you documented everything. Going back to Greg's point, you have your SSPs, and you have gone through each one of them. So essentially, we as C3PAO, we are not doing anything magical, right? Essentially, our guide is 800, 171, 171A. That's what we are going to go through. So all we are going to be doing is examine, observe, and test. Examine, observe, and test. Examine, observe, and test. That's all we are going to do. And depending on what kind of controls are applicable for your environment. So we are going to say at the end of the day, whether you're meeting the requirement, not meeting the requirement, or that requirement is not applicable. These are the only 3 options we have as assessor. So one of the 3 options we will select, and then we need to essentially justify why we are saying you're meeting that control requirement, and we need to justify why you are not meeting the control requirement and why it is not applicable, right? So all of them requires very detailed explanation of each one of them, right? And also one important thing for you to know is there is a portion of controls that we need to do in-person audit, right? So it majority of the thing could be a virtual audit, but there are CMMC as per their cap, they have specifically called out about 15 to 20 controls that requires in-person audit. What the examples of some of those controls, as you could imagine, these are like physical security controls. I cannot remotely see how is your physical security set up, whether your disposal processes are all meeting all the requirements of 800, 171, and the way like you allow the visitor logs, escorting them and whatnot. Those are like some of the control that requires in-person thing. So essentially, when you engage a C3PAO, there is going to be 2 components. One is the virtual, and then the second one is in person, right? In terms of conducting the audit, pretty straightforward process. You're going to kick off. Even before kicking off, we are going to primarily be spending a lot of time with the organization OSCs to identify what is the real scope of what we are going to be auditing. That is, they are spending and elaborating that particular section a lot. It is relatively new, as you all could imagine. CMMC is relatively new, but they are spending a lot of time in terms of making sure everyone engaged in this project, right? Like whether it's C3PAO, RPO, or OSC, and even Cyber AB and DoD, like they understand the phase 1 part of it, which is scoping it, making sure that like you clearly document, plan, frame the assessment, and then identify everything, all the moving parts and stuff, and then come up with some kind of a timeline, and then complete the contract that are required, right? Then we move on to the phase 2, which is, in my opinion, is the core of what we do. So that is this is the assessment part. So as I mentioned, examine, interview, test. Examine, interview, test. That's all we are going to be doing. And you could pull up, you could just Google up and then figure out 800, 171A security requirements for all of the 171 controls, 110 controls are out there. And so they have specifically called out, say, for example, just to give you an example, access control, right? Access control, they kind of break down further into what are the processes that are accessing the in-scope system, what are the users accessing the system, and how do they access it, and all the different details, line items are out there for 800.171a. Those are some of the things that we are going to go in detail. So technically, this could get very, very a deep dive in terms of how we are auditing the system, how we are identifying potential risk and stuff, and then like documenting all of these things, right? So third-party gap analysis, so readiness report, whatever you have already created with RPOs and things, those are like some of our input. That is something we will use to further document our assessment findings, and or like we would probably be referring some of those things as well as part of our things. There's two main things that we are going to be looking at as we are auditing, right? The adequacy and sufficiency. Those are the two things that they specifically talk about in this guide. One is, does this information that is provided is the right evidence, right? Like let's say you are for access control, you're going to give your active directory information, and we are going to be going over all of the details and figuring out what kind of accounts are there, group accounts are there, and then what kind of automated accounts are created and stuff. And then the second thing in terms of sufficiency we are going to be looking at is Active Directory is the only access control system that you have, or do you have any other one-off system that are authorizing users and processes into your CUI and FCI data, right? That's what we are going to be looking at. And so again, like after doing all these assessments, we do have scoring guidelines again. They have a CMMC scoring with DOD assessment scoring methodology. There's a document available out there. And then the way it works is like each of the controls are the scores are assigned depending on the priorities from 1 to 5. Right, and if you are meeting the requirements, then we are going to give you some score. If you are not meeting the requirement, obviously the score is going to be 0. So at the end of the day, we can categorize some of the items or like less significant, which will be going under the limited practice deficiency, and then like we will be preparing our the preliminary findings and stuff. So anything less than 80%, that means you are technically not going to be certified, right? So that's where like you don't want to be in, and that's where I think the RPO's engagement and your pre-assessment and the readiness assessment is going to really help you to understand your environment, understand the controls better, and then make sure that they are implemented and then ready for testing and things, right? So that is how like the whole thing works. Anything less than 80%. So the way it is calculated is out of 110 controls, if you are 88 or less, if you're not meeting 88 controls, right? Then like you will be under the you will not be recommended for certification. Let's put it that way. And then if I have identified, let's say if our organization identifies a certain LPDC within your environment, again we cannot categorize all your controls under LPDC, right? So it is going to be only set of controls that Cyber AB has categorized or DOD has categorized that could be considered as LPDC based on the control efficiency. Say, for example, if you don't have a FIPS validated encryption, cryptography, then it's not, I cannot put them under LPDC. So that's going to be totally separate, and that will be a straight not met requirement, right? And so there are certain things which we could put under LPDC, and you have 5 days to get them corrected. And so let's say you have an 88 score and you pass the certification, and then like you would still end up having POM, right? So plan of action and milestone for each of the controls. We are specifically going to be documenting what are the weakness, what is the scope, and what is like kind of your mitigation options, and what could be. So the one important thing or interesting thing that they also want us to quantify is the cost. What will be the approximate cost of implementing this particular control and thing, and then doing some kind of risk assessment of not having that particular control in place, right? So that will be the main thing that we will be documenting as part of our poem. So as you could imagine, we are not the expert of your environment, OSC's environment, so we will be collaboratively working with OSCs to identify the details of the poem and then like documenting everything that is required. Next slide, please. So once we have this whole information, then like you are ready to go. If you're going to be 80% plus, then like we are going to be recommending you for the interim certification. That's where the EMAS comes in. What we will do is like we will update all the required documents into the EMAS, the DoD site, where like they will have access to all the information. So everything that we are doing, they have visibility into it. And in fact, like we also need to attest for the COI, that is the conflict of interest, even before we start our engagement with you. So that way, like there is no collusion between the C3PAO and the OSC to get them certified, right? So all these things are available with the DoD for their reference, right? And so if we are not, like, of course, as Greg mentioned, like if you're not 80%, if you're less than 80%, then you're going to be redoing the whole thing, right? So again, you don't want to be in there. So it is a pretty expensive affair for everybody. So what you want to do is like you want to, as I mentioned in the very beginning, you do all the heavy lifting well, and start with get everything done so that like you're ready and ready to bring in the C3PAO and get your organization certified, right? The phase 4 is pretty much the standard formality where we will be closing out all the poems after one. So you have about 180 days to close out all the poems, right? So in phase 3, what we are doing is, let's say you have a poem, then we are going to be giving you a conditional certification, right? It's not like the final certification, it will be a conditional certification. And then like you have up to 180 days according to poem. Then like you will have to engage the same C3PAO, or it could be a separate different C3PAO. They will come in and then review all our poems and close out the assessments, and that way like you are good to go for 3 years. So it's a 3-year cycle, right? So you will have to get yourself certified again in the next 3 years. As I mentioned in the very beginning, for all of these processes, guides, everything is available for OSCs and general public and RPOs, C3PAOs, right? That's the process we are going to follow, and you do have appeal process. In case if you don't agree with our assessment, you don't agree with the process what you are following, you do have a appeal process that you could just follow to make sure that your money is well spent, right? So that's like in essence the certification. So a lot of time we get asked how long the certification process is does take and stuff. It totally depends. It totally depends on the scope and how many sites we are talking about, and the complexity of the whole thing. Generally, our assessment could go from like a month to 3 months, right? And then based on our experience, at least a lot of companies are taking anywhere from 3 to 6 months to do the implementation, do the self-assessment, the readiness with RPOs and things, and then bring in the CMMC C3PAOs to do the certification. Next slide, please, Aditi. Yeah. Oh, okay. So, Greg, you want to address this?
Yeah, so we mentioned this earlier in the presentation with regard to the journey that you have. As we've laid out, the process is there's a lot of steps And there's a lot of places where you can go wrong in the self-assessment effort. We certainly encourage you to go through, especially with the project spectrum, to get familiarized with what's going to happen, but certainly engage people that are in this day in and day out to help you navigate this journey. And then we get into the next question, which I love, and it's difficult. So this is the fun one. What's it going to cost? Well, the thing that we do as an advisory team, we always want to make sure that the RPO is the right fit and that it's appropriate for you to be engaging the RPO, and it's appropriate for you to even pursue your certification. Generally, we have the first conversation about what percentage of business you're actually going to do, and is there going to be an ROI? And the rule of thumb that we follow, it varies, but if you're 50% of your business, or maybe even a third of your business is in the defense industrial base, you're probably going to want to consider this process. There are numbers that are floating around. I will tell you that the costs vary by size, scope, and maturity of your environment. I can tell you to also beware, because what I hope you have got as a macro theme from this is CMMC is going to happen. It's going to happen sooner than a lot of people have been thinking about. The time to procrastinate is over, and we need to act. But the challenge is you're going to have a huge demand pushing on a limited supply of professionals that can help you with this process. So start thinking about it today. There will be market pricing. All of the people that are in the ecosystem, the RPOs, the C3PAOs, the LTPs, licensed training providers, all have a code of ethics that's restricting you from doing things like lost leader engagements to do a pre-assessment or anything like that. That should be a red flag if someone is proposing that. This is an industry, it's an ecosystem. We have market pricing that is going to be generally universal across the country, but to specify what it's going to cost you individually is going to require us to talk to you about the process, understand your environment, and as I mentioned, what the size, scope, and maturity is. So the kind of in some of the questions and frequently asked, does this replace other certifications? It does not replace FedRAMP. FedRAMP is not CMMC. It will not be used. Well, there may be some version of CMMC for other federal agencies, perhaps HHS. It doesn't replace anything with regard to HIPAA compliance, for instance. A special note is, and there's also, well, I'll get to that. The thing you have to understand is that you're following, at its core, NIST 800-171, which is a universally recognized security framework that is able to crosswalk to other frameworks, but it is not in and of itself a way to get a SOC 2 or an ISO certification or even FedRAMP, as I mentioned. One other thing that we do discover when we're doing these engagements, and I mentioned it a little earlier, is that the RPO may identify compliance requirements such as ITAR. If you have data from the US MIL list in your environment, that requires a set of other controls that you need to follow that are not encompassed in the CMMC certification process. So CMMC compliance does not equal compliance with ITAR, and that ITAR may come up if we identify certain types of data in your environment. So the next steps, get connected to us. This presentation has a link. I could tell you for email purposes, that link will take you to, well, not for email, for what the link does will take you to the Tego data and the data brackets individual CMMC websites. Additional information can be had for the RPO work by emailing info@tegodata.com. We put the list of references, those have links in there. There's that Project Spectrum link that I was talking about. I also encourage you to go to the Cyber AB Marketplace and their website through that link. You have the two website links. Those are our primary website links. And of course, information, frequently asked questions about CMMC that the DoD has provided via that link there for the FAQs.
Perfect.
And
Thank you, Greg.
That's all I have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. This information was extremely useful for all organizations considering and seeking certification. I'm very sure that the roadmap that we've laid out, with so many details, is going to elicit a lot of questions. As Greg shared, you can connect with Tego Data, and if you want to connect with us, these are all the places where you can reach us. We have social media, you have our website, you can call us, and we hope that you won't keep your questions with you. You will reach out and begin your journey immediately. And we hope that all organizations take this early start so that you can meet your goals and get your contracts. Thank you so much once again from Data Brackets and from Tego Data. Have a great day.
Thank you, Aditi. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.